In April 2023, the United States government set a target. 56% of every new car sold in America would be electric by 2032. Officials framed it as a race, not against gas stations, against China. By the third quarter of 2025, American electric vehicle sales hit a peak. 10.6% of every new car sold, an all-time high. 1 quarter later, that number was cut nearly in half, 5.8%. The quarter after that, it barely moved at all. Meanwhile, in the country America set out to beat, roughly 1 in every 2 new cars sold is already electric. Keep that number in mind. It matters later. This is the story of how the country that built Tesla, that passed a climate law worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and that spent years telling its own auto industry to go all in on electric, ended up watching a rival cross the finish line first. Not because that rival built a better engine, because America stopped running the race halfway through it. The numbers since then are brutal. Detroit has taken more than $50 billion in combined electric vehicle write-downs since late 2025. Honda just posted its first annual loss in roughly 70 years. Battery plants built with taxpayer money now sit half-finished across Kentucky, Michigan, and Tennessee. Meanwhile, a Chinese automaker most Americans have never heard of just sold more electric cars in a single year than Tesla ever has. Even counting hybrids alongside pure electrics, America's total electrified share of new car sales still only touched 26% at its recent peak. China blew past that milestone years ago. So how did this happen? How did the country that once looked unbeatable in this fight end up watching from the sidelines? To understand that, you have to go back to the moment everyone, from Detroit boardrooms to the White House, genuinely believed America was going to win this thing outright. Start with Tesla. By 2021, it was worth more than every other automaker on Earth combined. It had done what General Motors and Ford spent a century failing to do. It made an electric car people actually wanted to own, not one they felt guilty about buying. Detroit took notice, and fast. General Motors chief executive Mary Barra told shareholders the company was building toward an all-electric future, backed by a new battery platform called Ultium, and a plan for more than 2 million units of annual EV capacity by the end of 2025, including 600,000 electric trucks. Ford created an entirely new division, Model E, just to build and sell electric vehicles at scale. Then came the money, and it was enormous. In August 2022, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, a climate law worth roughly $370 billion. It handed buyers a $7,500 tax credit on qualifying electric vehicles. It handed manufacturers billions more to build battery plants on American soil, from Michigan to Georgia. The effect was immediate and visible. Since the law passed, more than 400 major clean energy manufacturing projects have been announced across 42 states, promising over $130 billion in investment and more than 123,000 permanent jobs. Politicians on both sides showed up for the ribbon cuttings. If you've ever wondered why so many battery plants ended up in Republican congressional districts, that's not an accident. It's simply where land and labor were cheapest. Subscribe now, because the next chapter is where this entire bet starts to unravel, and it happens faster than almost anyone in Detroit expected. General Motors expanded battery capacity across Lansing, Michigan, Lordstown, Ohio, and Spring Hill, Tennessee, 3 towns that hadn't seen this kind of manufacturing investment in decades. For a few years, this genuinely looked like the start of American industrial dominance over the car of the future. By 2024, the picture still looked strong. New EV registrations in the United States hit roughly 1.3 million, a record. Electrified vehicles, including hybrids, were creeping toward a fifth of all new car sales. Analysts at Cox Automotive expected pure electric vehicles to reach 15% of the American market by 2025, with hybrids taking another 18%. Executives kept doubling down on that forecast. Ford poured billions into a 3-row electric SUV and a next-generation electric F-150 Lightning, calling it a defining product for the brand's future. General Motors pushed the Cadillac Escalade IQ and the Chevrolet Silverado EV toward production. Even hybrids were booming alongside them. Toyota led that category with a commanding share of the market, and hybrid sales hit a record 756,000 units in the fourth quarter of 2025, up 57% year over year. The industry line was simple and repeated constantly. Electric wasn't a bet anymore. It was the plan, full stop. Rivian and Lucid, the smaller American challengers, were growing too, riding new product launches rather than volume. Then came September 2025. Buyers rushed to beat a deadline. The $7,500 federal tax credit was scheduled to expire at the end of the month, killed years early by legislation called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Dealers reported record-breaking sales that month. Several automakers posted their best electric vehicle numbers in company history. It looked, briefly, like proof the entire strategy was finally working. According to Kelley Blue Book, electric vehicles hit an all-time high of 10.6% of the American new car market in the third quarter of 2025 alone. But that was the sugar rush before the crash. The tax credit didn't get extended. It didn't get replaced with anything else. On October 1st, it was simply gone, and almost nobody in Detroit was fully prepared for what came next. The crack came at midnight on September 30th, 2025. That's the exact moment the federal EV tax credit legally expired, ending a program originally scheduled to run until 2032, nearly 7 years early. It didn't happen in isolation. Around the same window, the Trump administration revoked California's long-standing waiver to set its own tailpipe emissions rules, a policy dozens of other states had adopted to push EV adoption further. Federal penalties for automakers that missed fuel economy targets were zeroed out entirely. Import tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles, already sitting at 100%, were stacked with a separate 25% duty on every imported car under Section 232. The International Energy Agency put it plainly in its 2026 Global Outlook. Without the tax credit, there is expected to be virtually no government financial support left for electric car buyers in America going forward. According to Wood Mackenzie research analyst Igor Prokotsev, the deeper issue was never really the incentive itself. He described it as a supply structure problem, not a gas price problem. Here's what that actually means in practice. The affordable electric cars reshaping the rest of the world, the compact Chinese models priced under $30,000, were never allowed into the American market to begin with. Tariffs saw to that. So when the tax credit disappeared, American buyers weren't just losing a temporary discount. They were left staring at a showroom full of expensive trucks and SUVs, with nothing cheaper waiting to catch them on the way down. Compare that to what America's closest neighbours did instead. The European Union opened its doors to Chinese automakers in January, provided prices stayed above an agreed floor. Canada cut its tariff on Chinese EVs from 100% down to just 6.1% that same March. Both markets grew. America went the opposite direction and closed the door tighter. The fourth quarter of 2025 delivered the verdict, and it was ugly. According to Kelley Blue Book, American EV sales fell 36% year over year in a single quarter. Some individual brands didn't just decline, they collapsed outright. Ford's electric vehicle sales dropped 51.9% for the quarter. Chevrolet fell 65.8%, sliding back down under 10,000 units sold. Audi's American EV sales plunged 91.1%, down to just 584 vehicles nationwide for 3 entire months. Mercedes finished the full year down 54%, one of the worst results of any major brand. The first quarter of 2026 didn't bring any relief either. Sales fell another 27% year over year, according to Cox Automotive. New EV inventory sitting unsold on dealer lots ballooned to 130 days worth of supply, 46% higher than gas-powered vehicles sitting on the same lots. In California, long considered the bellwether for American EV adoption, the electric vehicle share of new registrations fell from 21% in 2025 to just 13.7% in the first quarter of 2026 alone. Researchers at UC Davis found something uncomfortable buried underneath those headline numbers. Losing the tax credit alone should have only cut demand by around 15 to 20%. The actual drop recorded in California was 35%. That gap wasn't really buyers changing their minds. It was automakers quietly pulling supply off the market before buyers even had a chance to decide for themselves. General Motors had already started that pullback in late October, laying off more than 3,400 workers across its battery and assembly plants, including 1,200 at its Factory Zero plant in Detroit. Another 550 workers at an Ultium Cells battery plant in Warren, Ohio, were laid off indefinitely, with 850 more facing temporary layoffs. That's not a demand problem, that's a retreat, and the retreat was about to get a lot more expensive for everyone involved. Ford went first, and it went big. In December 2025, the company announced a $19.5 billion charge tied directly to killing its electric vehicle roadmap. The all-electric F-150. Lightning, once called a Model T moment for the 21st century, was finished. Production ended after less than 4 years on sale. Chief Executive Jim Farley didn't pretend the company got this right. He admitted the Ford Mustang Mach-E's wiring harness was 70 pounds heavier and over a mile longer than the equivalent part inside a Tesla his own team had torn apart to study. 2 months later, on Ford's fourth quarter earnings call, the real number arrived. A $4.8 billion operating loss for the year in its electric vehicle division alone. Farley's response to investors was blunt. "The customer has spoken," he said. "That's the punchline." General Motors followed a similar script with less public drama but just as much financial pain. The company booked a $7.6 billion write-down on its electric vehicle business, on top of a $1.6 billion charge taken the year before. It converted its Orion assembly plant in Michigan to build gasoline-powered vehicles. Chief Financial Officer Paul Jacobson told analysts on record that the company expected EV demand growth to slow pretty significantly through 2026. Then Honda delivered the gut punch nobody in the industry saw coming. The company disclosed a $15.7 billion restructuring charge, putting it on track for its first annual loss in roughly 70 years. 3 planned electric models built specifically for its new Ohio plant were scrapped before a single customer ever drove one. Stellantis and Volkswagen weren't far behind. Stellantis cancelled its fully electric Ram 1500 pickup outright, replacing it with a gas-assisted extended-range version instead. Volkswagen began winding down production of the ID.4, its flagship American electric SUV, at its plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. 3 of the industry's biggest names, all admitting to the same mistake within months of each other. A 4th and 5th followed right behind them. Not only were automakers writing off billions on the cars themselves, but the factories meant to build the batteries inside those cars were falling apart at the same time. Research firm Rhodium Group found that companies cancelled $22 billion in previously announced American electric vehicle and battery manufacturing projects in 2025 alone, more than the entire industry had announced in new investment the year before. Battery maker AESC halted construction on 2 plants worth $3.6 billion, combined in Kentucky and South Carolina, after tariffs made its own imported factory machinery from China dramatically more expensive to install. Aspen Aerogel scrapped $1 billion Georgia factory entirely and shifted the work to Mexico and, strikingly, to China itself. Its own chief financial officer explained exactly why, in blunt terms. China sits at roughly 50% electric vehicle penetration already. North America and Europe are still stuck around 10 to 15%. And this is where that number from the very beginning comes back around. Remember it? While American battery plants sat half-built in towns like Kokomo and Bowling Green, the rest of the world was not waiting around for America to catch up. Global electric vehicle sales grew 20% in 2025, crossing 20 million units worldwide for the first time. Europe grew by more than 30%. Latin America grew 75%. Asia-Pacific markets outside China grew a staggering 80%. In March 2026 alone, roughly 30 separate countries recorded their highest monthly EV sales totals in history. On paper, one American number actually looked encouraging. Public charging sessions in the United States hit 141 million in 2025, up 30% year over year, and used EV sales climbed 12% in the first quarter of 2026 alone. It looked, for a moment, like proof that the American EV was quietly thriving underneath the bad headlines. It wasn't. That used car boom was largely lease returns flooding back onto lots, cars leased under a loophole in the original tax credit between 2023 and 2025, not fresh demand for something new. The infrastructure was catching up to cars that had already been sold years earlier, not signalling a market getting ready to grow again. America wasn't just losing ground here, it was the only major market on Earth standing still while literally everyone else sprinted past it. Here's the reckoning, laid out in numbers, and the numbers do not need much decoration. In 2025, for the first time in company history, Tesla sold fewer electric vehicles worldwide than a rival. China's BYD delivered 2.26 million battery electric vehicles that year. Tesla delivered 1.64 million. It was Tesla's second consecutive annual decline in deliveries. Globally, BYD now holds 12.1% of the entire battery electric market. Tesla holds 8.8%. In May 2025, BYD outsold Tesla in Europe for the first time on Tesla's own established turf. BYD's vehicle exports doubled to more than 1 million units in a single year, spreading fast across Latin America, the Middle East, and Japan. In 2011, Elon Musk laughed off BYD during a television interview. Asked directly about the company, he said flatly, "I don't think they have a great product." 14 years later, that same company builds more electric cars every year than it did. It's also building a 5-minute fast-charging platform and new factories in Turkey, Hungary, and soon Spain, expanding directly into the markets Tesla once treated as its own backyard. America isn't losing this war because its engineers are worse. It isn't losing because American consumers secretly hate electric cars. It's losing because it built an entire empire on top of a single subsidy, pulled that subsidy without a replacement, cancelled the factories meant to compete long-term, and left its own automakers standing in a market with nothing cheap left to sell. $50 billion written off across just 3 companies, 70 years of Honda profitability erased inside one single announcement. Battery plants are sitting unfinished across 3 separate states, and the rest of the planet is buying electric cars faster than at any point since the American credit disappeared for good. 1 out of every 3 EVs sold in America in early 2026 was a single Tesla model, the Model Y. That's not dominance. That's dependence on one car carrying an entire industry's remaining hope. So what actually went wrong here? It came down to 3 mistakes, and all 3 were preventable. First, policy whiplash. America built its entire electric vehicle strategy around a single tax credit and a single emissions rule, then let both get erased inside one presidential election cycle. An industry that needs an entire decade to plan and build one factory cannot survive 4-year policy swings dictating its future. Second, there was no cheap car waiting at the bottom. While the rest of the world filled its roads with electric vehicles priced under $30,000, tariffs kept those exact cars locked out of America entirely. When the federal discount finally disappeared, there was nothing left on the lot for an ordinary buyer to actually afford. It's worth noting that Toyota, Lexus, and Cadillac actually grew their electrified sales through this entire period, proof that the mistake was never electrification itself, just which vehicles and price points America chose to bet on. Third, and this one might sting the most, America effectively handed its manufacturing lead to its own rival instead of racing it to the finish. $22 billion in cancelled battery investment didn't just vanish into thin air. That capacity, that expertise, that momentum simply moved to wherever the demand still existed. China didn't have to win this war outright. America handed over the win in installments, 1 cancelled factory and 1 expired credit at a time. The rest of the world is not slowing down. China is certainly not slowing down. The only real question left is whether America's automakers can find their way back into a race they were supposed to be leading from the very start. If you want to understand exactly how Ford went from building the best-selling truck in America to writing off $19 billion trying to electrify it, that full story is next. Subscribe, because it gets stranger than you'd think.